Hello everyone, my name is Aditya. Welcome back to the channel. I'm making this video and publishing it after quite a while, but anyways, I thought this is something very important and I want to share this. This is different type of video rather than the usual content I make on this channel about other web technology and things focused in that direction. But today I'm going to be talking about Linux, and this is a full beginner's guide, complete introduction to Linux. If you don't know anything about Linux and if you want to get started, this is going to be a perfect introduction for you. So I'm going to be talking about the entire process until what you can actually do to get started. But this is not going to be a practical guide where I actually show you the steps to get it on your computer. That's probably going to be for another video, but this is going to get you, give you all the information you need and help you get started right away. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what is Linux itself. So when you talk about Linux, a lot of people compare it to desktop operating systems that like Windows or Mac OS. But the thing is, Linux is just the Linux kernel. So that's like the base of the operating system. It's not a full desktop operating system without a few other components. So Linux is quite old. It's been used for a long time, and you will more often hear the term distributions or distros. So this is a more complete set of software. So this includes the base Linux kernel plus a few additional software, and that creates a full-fledged OS which you can compare to Windows or Mac OS. And even when you talk about an operating system, it could be just a command line based operating system, just a black screen, just text and commands. Very similar to very old computers that didn't have a lot of graphics power. But the computers that we use nowadays are desktop operating systems with all the graphical elements. So that's what I am referring to when I talk about a desktop operating system, and that's definitely possible with Linux, and that's what I use every day. So let's move on to the next topic, which is going to be how is it better. So when you talk about how is it better, a few things. First thing is Linux is very lightweight, and it's much more efficient than Windows. So if you talk about a Windows download itself, it's going to be quite big. Definitely it's not going to be 2 gigs or less. It's definitely in my guess would be 5 GB or more. If you go to their website and try to download the installation medium, you'll be able to check it out. And Apple, obviously it's only on Apple hardware and you need to buy it from the store, so you don't have any good estimate, but this is how it works. And the other thing is compatibility. So after a few years, especially electronics, you're going to have an issue. Your hardware might not be able to keep up, your computer is going to become old, it might slow down, you're going to have a lot of issues. But Linux has extremely good support with especially old computers and hardware. So if you have a computer lying around that is too slow and it's not able to run the Windows operating system, the first thing is you're not going to be able to get an update for Windows. It's not going to even be possible. The second thing is if you try to run Linux, it's going to run perfectly and it's going to run so much more faster, and all of a sudden it's very usable. The other thing is it's free. It's completely free to use. The reason is it's open source. The code is freely available. And another advantage of it being open source is it has very low or less number of security vulnerabilities, because the code is being checked by hundreds or thousands of people every day, and a lot of security experts. So there's very less chance that you're going to have any security issues. And the other thing is most oftenly, you don't need antivirus software on Linux, because the first thing is it's not as popular as Windows or Mac OS. So there are not a lot of viruses that even exist on Linux. But the other thing is you don't have to worry anyways. It's very secure by default unless you make any changes. So that's pretty much all I need to talk about, when I'm talking about how it's going to be better than any other operating system. But I don't want to talk about the negatives, or before moving along to what you actually need to do to get started. So this is going to be why you shouldn't use Linux. So I'm a pretty biased person, especially because I've tried Linux and I really like it. I don't think why anyone should go back to something like Windows. but I'm definitely going to give you a few things to consider if you want to switch to Linux. If you're a person who depends on the Microsoft Office suite, you probably shouldn't come to Linux. There are definitely extremely good alternatives. There's a very popular suite called LibreOffice, and almost every month they're coming up with a lot of features and new enhancements so that the compatibility between their own software and their own file format, which is a ODT file format, is as close as to Microsoft Office. So even today, if you want to run Linux and if you want to use LibreOffice instead of Microsoft Office, you can. And if someone sends you a Microsoft Office file, the one ending in .doc or .docx, it's still going to open up in LibreOffice and you're going to be able to edit it and communicate, but it's not going to be perfect. And there are ways to actually download and install Microsoft Office on Linux. It's not official and it's not always the best scenario. It's not going to work perfectly, so I don't recommend it. And if that's something that you really depend on and there is nothing you can do to move away from it, then you probably shouldn't use a Linux based operating system. And then the other thing is any kind of application in general, because in my opinion Linux does everything as good as Windows. And especially the only reason I saw people not come to Linux was for gaming, because most people don't play games on Apple based systems. It doesn't work well and most people just don't use it. The only place that they were playing games, PC games, on were Windows. And now, especially with the development of Steam OS, Proton, almost all the games in the Steam library play perfectly on Linux. It's definitely not playing natively on Linux, but when you talk about the raw performance, people aren't seeing any kind of difference. It's running equally as good on Linux or Windows. So, gaming should be out of the way, most games at least. And the other things you might have to consider are applications like Photoshop, Adobe products, which don't work on Linux or don't work perfectly on Linux. So things like this, generally based on the application. If the app that you want isn't supported on Linux, that's probably something you should consider. And another point that I'm going to talk about over here is how you could use Windows and Linux side by side. A popular option that people were using is just dual booting Linux or Windows. So every time you boot up your system, switch it on, it's going to ask you, do you want to boot into Linux or Windows? You can have two partitions on your hard drive. So you could choose, but it doesn't work perfectly, especially with newer systems that have SSDs and there are other complications. So I don't recommend that. If you want to run Linux, just run Linux as it is. What I would recommend instead is, if you want to use any other operating system, maybe some other Linux operating itself or Windows, maybe you can use a Windows or whatever other operating system as a virtual machine inside your Linux host machine. But the only thing is, things that are very graphically intensive won't work well. So as long as you're not playing games or doing video editing, it should be okay. So maybe you just want to use Microsoft Office. A virtual machine is going to be perfectly fine, and this just works good. Very efficient. It's sandbox. It's isolated. You can just spin up the virtual machine whenever you want, and you could use the Windows VM with your Linux apps both side by side. You don't have to shut down, restart every time you want to change the OS. So that's a possible fix that you can have. So I'm going to now switch gears and talk about how things work on Linux, because just because I said it's compatible and it's something that you can switch to from Windows or Mac OS doesn't mean it uses the same approach for a lot of things. So the first thing is, it's free and open source, but the problem is there are very few computers that actually ship with Linux pre-installed. That's something that you don't often think about, but on Windows and Mac OS, the computer you buy comes pre-installed with it and you don't need to do the installation. So when you want to use Linux, you need to do it manually or give it to someone. So your computer, the first thing you need to do is download the installation medium, the ISO file, from wherever you need to download it from, most probably their website. So maybe if you want to install Ubuntu, which is a very popular Linux distribution, you can go over to their website and there'll be a download link. You can download that file. That's going to be the main file, approximately 2 to 5 GB in size. You're going to download that. Now, I'm not going to talk about CDs or DVDs. That's pretty much outdated. No one uses that. But all you need to get started is a flash drive. So have your flash drive, and your purpose right now is to get that ISO file onto your flash drive, but you can't just copy it over. So you need to use some program like Balena Etcher or Rufus on Windows. And what this program is going to do is take your ISO file and put it onto your flash drive in a way that all computers can understand. So once you have your flash drive ready, you need to plug it into your computer that you want to install it on, reboot, and when you reboot, it's going to ask you if you want to boot from the flash drive. So proceed with that, and you're going to be walking through the installation instructions. So the instructions are very often very straightforward. There's nothing very confusing. Anyways, I'm planning of making a video on the entire installation instruction. So that's pretty much straightforward, and you're going to be ready in your new system. And the things that you should consider are that I recommend doing a clean install, which means it wipes out all the data on your current system. If you had Windows on your system previously, Windows is going to be gone, all your data is going to be gone. So definitely back up your data, that's extremely important. And you're going to be ready with your new OS. Don't It's going to ask you if you want to manually partition or do dual boot or something like that. I really don't recommend that, especially for beginners, because that's the place where things can go wrong. Otherwise, it's a very straightforward process. So that's the installation. But even after you get started, the most important thing that is different with Linux is something called package management. So on Windows or Mac OS, the way you basically install apps are two basic ways. You either go to the App Store and install stuff, or you go to their website and you download and go through the installation wizard. Those are the two main ways. But the problem with this is you, the user, you have to manage all the software. If you have some 50 pieces of software installed on your system, it's your job to see which of the software requires an update, maybe due to a security issue or just new features. If you want to remove a software, you need to go and remove it manually, and you need to keep track of all the software that you have installed on the computer. A lot of times you might only be installing one software, but if you don't read the terms properly, the instructions properly, it's going to be installing 3 or 5 other software additionally. So you need to keep track of all this, and it's going to be very hard for you to manage it. And when you try to uninstall something, you could break the entire thing, because a piece of software depends on another. So all these issues are things that you would run into. But on Linux, you have something similar to the App Store, but I feel it's very efficient. It's called Package Manager. A package manager is just another app or software, very similar to app stores that you have on Windows or Linux. And these programs can either be command line, so just fully text based, or they can be a GUI application that you could see with menus and click on stuff, interact with something that you're very familiar with. And what these package managers do is they have a list of repositories. So these repositories contain all the list of software that they can download and use. And if you feel that the software that you want is not available on those repositories, you can add other additional repositories to it if you want. The distribution that I am running on my computer is Arch Linux, and I haven't had to do any of this. So all the software that I need is available on the repositories, and one simple command is going to get it on my system. That's one of the reasons I love it, and I really found it annoying or irritating with Windows, because I would have to manually go to each company's website and download their app. So here I don't need to do that. So it takes care of everything from downloading, installing, removing, updating. You want to update your entire system with one command or one click, you can do that. And almost 90% of the times when you update your entire system, you don't need to restart your computer. It's going to update perfectly. It will do it in the background, and you can continue working. So Linux is generally very reliable and very stable. You're not going to have any kind of crashes or issues. And I feel that there are very few disadvantages apart from the compatibility. If you're transitioning from Windows to Linux, some of your apps might not work, but otherwise I don't see any kind of issues. So that's pretty much all I need to say in this video. So this ends this guide. If you want to see any other future content, please let me know. And as I said, I will be giving you the practical getting started guide or the installation instruction in a future video. So please leave your feedback as always in the comment section. And if you found this interesting, or if you have a friend who might consider switching to Linux and wants to find more information, please share it. I hope it'll be helpful. And so that's it for this video. Thank you for watching.